Hello there, fish tank people. Tonight I'm just going to talk quickly about 4 of my favorite algae eaters for the home aquarium. Now, you may not eat algae, but you are also the first step in controlling algae in your aquarium, because algae, after all, is just a lower form of plant life. So algae needs light and it needs food to grow. So the easiest way to prevent it is simply to control your lighting in the aquarium. Now you can do that by controlling your photo period. That is how long your lights are on. And I would suggest when you're starting a new aquarium, start on the low side so that you can always turn it up rather than starting on the high side in terms of hours, and then you have to turn it down as you have to get rid of the algae. Now what I do is usually I start with 6 hours and then I'll up it from there. 2 of my tanks, 6 hours a day is all of the light they need. The one that I'm sitting next to here gets a bit more, 8 hours, because it's a higher tank from bottom to top. So it requires a bit longer periods of light, and it's full of plants. The second thing that algae need, of course, is food. Now the food can come in many forms, but the main thing is nitrates, NO3, together with phosphates. That will give you algae, and how you eliminate them is of course by doing partial water changes. Things like deep substrate can also lessen your nitrate a little bit, and of course there's other ways like denitrator filters and anoxic filtration, which is something I don't have experience of. There's some good channels that you can check on that, but keep the food source low and keep the light source not too much, and that will help to control algae as well. And of course lots and lots of plants, because the plants are a higher form of plant life, and that outcompetes your algae for light and food. But then there always will be some algae in the tank, and maybe sometimes you're in the break-in phase, algae gets carried away. So there is a cleanup crew besides yourself that can keep the algae under control, and here are some of my favorites, both invertebrates and fish, to do that job. Now right here, sitting on the plant and on the glass, are one of my favorites for cleaning up algae, and these are of course Otocinclus, or sometimes by their common name dwarf suckermouth catfish. Now they're small little catfish, and they're very peaceful, and they do well in small aquariums, they do well in nano tanks, and they won't harm your plants. If ever one dashes off, they're quite shy feeders. So at first when they come into the aquarium, they may well be a bit underfed. So I would suggest, besides the algae, also feed them up with a bit of blanched slices of baby marrow, or zucchini as you call it in America, as well as de-shelled peas, and maybe some algae wafers can also do the trick. Another thing that they like eating is biofilm. So if you have a new tank, and of course the tank is cycled and all of that, the driftwood and especially the spiderwood can sometimes give off a film of fungus, which is not harmful to anything, but it is unsightly. And when the tank is properly run in, it's a very good idea to put these guys in, because they will eat that biofilm and it'll give them a nutritional boost as well. Now unfortunately, no single algae eater eats every kind of algae. These guys, they mostly, you can't get fish to pose for you. Off he goes again. Let me see if I can find him. There he is. These Otocinclus dwarf suckermouth catfish mostly eat the film algae, the plaque type algae, that soft algae that forms a film that you can rub off with your fingers. They are usually in the form of brown diatom algae, sometimes they're also green, but that soft film like algae and biofilm, that's what these guys keep under control. And they are small, they can go in your nano tanks as well. They like being in a little group, so try and get at least 2, but try and back it 6 or so or more of them. And so that's your dwarf suckermouth catfish. Looking at this leaf, this Anubias leaf, what do we have on the leaf? That's green spot algae, and we have them here in the aquarium that I'm filming at the moment, because the guy that eats the green spot algae is not in this particular tank, because I have clown loaches here, and as we all know, clown loaches love eating snails. So who takes care of the green spot algae? Who takes care of a green spot algae? Of course, these guys. This is a nerite snail. They come in many different color variations. They usually have a dark red brownish shell, and these with the little spots on the spiral. If the camera will just focus, because we've got the fish interfering, it's called a red onion. But what's nice about the nerite snails is they don't breed in fresh water. They only breed in brackish water. In fresh water, they will lay their little eggs. There you can see some of the nerite snail eggs, these white little eggs. It doesn't really bother me. The fish eventually, some of the fish eat them, and eventually they just disintegrate and decay. But the eggs don't hatch in fresh water. Now, it's a disadvantage if you want to breed nerite snails, but usually the thing with snails is they absolutely overrun an aquarium. They breed too much, especially if your hands are a bit heavy in feeding. And with nerite snails, there's no chance of them breeding and overpopulating your tank. They just quietly go about their business and clean the green spotted algae, as well as some of the foam algae that grows on the glass. So they do a great job, and I'm quite a fan of these snails, where I didn't used to keep snails before. Now here on this Anubias leaf, once again we see the dreaded black-beard algae growing on the edge. Now, why do we have black-beard algae here? Well, one of the reasons is there's one fish that's a black-beard algae machine. The only one I really know of it is black-beard algae, and this is a small nano tank, and unfortunately that fish grows a bit bigger and it can't go into nano tanks, so I will just have to remove that manually. But let's check out this algae eating machine. The black-beard algae eating machine, of course, that I'm talking about is the Siamese algae eater. As you can see, they can grow quite large. That's a really fat one. They're also good at getting to all the other food. They're part of a carp family, so they're not a catfish, but they munch down on these black-beard algae, and they're quick about it as well. Put a couple of these in a tank full of black-beard algae. In a week, you won't believe the difference. They really eat that. It's the only fish I know that really does eat that black-beard algae. There are others I've heard, American flag fish, mollies and so on. I just never have kept those fish, so I wouldn't know. I'm concentrating on what I know. The Siamese algae eater, that one is content at the moment. It's not going to eat any algae now. They also like being in a bit of a group, so keep at least 2, maybe 3 or 4 if the tank space allows it. They do grow a bit bigger, so you need about 150 liters, 200 liters and more is actually better. But that will take care of your black-beard algae in no time. And unlike the nerite snails, who are great algae eaters but they take their time, these guys are much quicker. Another important thing with the Siamese algae eater, remember I said Siamese algae eater, not Chinese algae eater. Don't confuse the two. You want the Siamese algae eater, because a Chinese algae eater will eat some algae when it's young, and then it develops aggression problems and sometimes suck the slime off a fish's body. You don't want those. Stick to the Siamese algae eater, who's got that very clear dark black stripe running from nose to base of tail. And here's my fourth and final favorite algae eater, and this is the bristlenose pleco of the genus Ancestris. There's a lot of different kinds of these. This is the most commonly found one, the dark brown or the black bristlenose pleco. This is still a young one. It's very similar to the common plecostomus in looks, but the common plecostomus grows huge, and just like the Chinese algae eater, it eats algae when it's young, but when it's big, then it eats much less algae, and it just grows too big for most people's tanks. These don't grow that big. This one is small, but there's a full-size one just below him. If I can get a shot, you can see his tail sticking out there, and that's a much bigger male, and he's got the bristle nose. There's other videos on my channel where you can see exactly how he looks as he eats a baby marrow. But these guys, they will eat most type of algae. I don't find that they eat blackbeard algae. The Siamese algae eater is the king of that, but they'll eat biofilm and they'll eat most types of algae. They don't grow that big. They'll grow about 7 centimeters, maybe a little bit more in the very biggest specimens, but they stay in a manageable size. so much preferable to the normal Plecostomus, the bristlenose pleco or Ancestris. They also need some driftwood in an aquarium. They like to hang on there, they like to hide there. Some say they also rasp off some of the fiber there. It's essential for their diet. I don't know how scientifically valid it is. There's some argument about it, but they do need driftwood in their tank. Without it, they don't seem very happy. So those are my 4 favorite algae eaters. So that's it, guys. These are not at all the algae eaters available. These are just the 4 different types that I have as a sort of a cleanup crew just to keep the algae in check. But I also check my feeding routine. I check my maintenance in terms of water changes and the like. I also have deep substrates, and I control my lighting to help them with the job. Also keep in mind that fish that require the same care as your other fish in the aquarium. And also remember that at some point the algae will become exhausted, and also there won't be enough algae maybe to give them enough to eat. So you need to feed them as well. About twice a week I put blanched slices of baby marrow in the tank, or maybe a couple of Ikari algae wafers just to help them along so that they have something to feed. The Siamese algae eater and the Otocinclus, the dwarf suckermouth, and the nereid snails, I don't find that they harm your plants at all. The bristlenose Ancestris pleco, that one can dig into your certain broadleaf plants like the Amazon swords, especially if they get hungry. So keep them fed a little bit as well. Well, that's it from me. If you watched this far, please give the channel a like and a subscribe. And until we see each other again, keep taking good care of those domestic denizens of